of a mega structure in the center. By the way, all my colleagues, great architects, 7 finalists at the competition, proposed, the Twin Towers, large mega structures, of Norman Foster, of Richard Meyer, of Stephen Hall, of many famous architects. I thought nothing should be built in the center of the site where people perished. 3,000 people from 90 different countries. It was not just Americans, 90 different countries. And I thought this should be really a homage to their memory, but also symbolic of New York, symbolic of the light of New York, of the torch of the Statue of Liberty, of the bedrock in which people should. And I show you this not out of vanity, but out of the fact that this project has many stakeholders. Here are the stakeholders, the families of the victims, who are in the thousands, uncles, brothers, sons, daughters, cousins, in the tens of thousands of people. Those are the families. That's the stakeholder. The Port Authority of New York, 7,000 architects and engineers, who owns the land of this site and who leases this land to private developers and their own architects. That Port Authority is governed by 2 governors, very powerful governors, the governor of New York and governor of New Jersey. Very important. The streets of New York are not governed by the governors, but by the mayor of New York. And under the street run the path trains, which are run by the independent path train authorities, and subways run by the Metropolitan Transit Agency. So you can see, plus federal agencies involved in funding some of the project. You can see that the client is not in the thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands of people. So winning the competition is easy. How do you bring consensus? How do you outlive the governors, the mayors? Now I've outlived 4 governors. I've outlived 3 mayors. I outlived 5 heads of the Port Authority, 4 heads of the MTA, 3 heads of the path authorities. Well, it's a marathon. Architecture taught me one thing, starting with the Jewish Museum, that it's not a short-range thing, that you can talk to the governor on the right, the mayor on the left, but it's a long-range project, and you have to create consensus. Consensus for people who don't agree what to do on the site. Of course, the developers have different ideas. So that's my sketch on the left. And I have to say, on the right is a rendering, pretty close to what is there now. And that's the trick. How do you go from an idea to reality? Because most master plans are just fantasies. They're never built. They're abandoned halfway through. But you have to be very practical. And that's what I did. I divided the site into separate towers. That's why I didn't build a mega tower, because nobody has money to buy, to build mega towers. Divide the site to smaller towers. So people can fund 1 tower at a time, as the money allows, as the economy allows. And then protect the public realm, the center, the footprints, the memorial. That's what it's about. There it is in site plan. On the left, you see Hudson River. You see that block. And very important to understand that it's not a self-standing block. It's connected to Battery Park, to Wall Street, to Tribeca, to Chinatown. It's really a living part of the city. And the art of the project is not what you see on the ground. Really, if you're architects, engineers, people interested in technology, you know that it's not what you see that is important. It's what's down below the ground. And below the ground are 75, 80 feet of infrastructure, levels of foundations, levels of trains, levels of connectivity. That has to really be given to all the people who will be working on the site in order to create really the site as it can be built progressively into the future. The slurry wall, that purple element, which is now visible through the visitor center, remember you saw it during the first pictures of the attack. It took some time to clean the debris. And I was very moved actually when I came to the site. I have to tell you a story because it's interesting. I was standing with all the finalists, my famous friends, at the top of One Liberty Plaza, looking down on the site. And somebody said, does anybody want to go to the site? And everyone said no, because it was a very dark day. It was November, it was raining, it was cold. Everybody said it's much easier to see the site from top. We were, very high floor, looking right down at the site. But I said, and Nina, let's go down. We want to see it. And I have to tell you, as I went down this ramp, 80 feet down below street level, my life changed. I realized that there's something different here. It's not about buildings. It's not about No one declared this ground sacred, but there's something that you touch when you come to the bottom of the bedrock. And I touched this wall, and the engineer told me it was a slurry wall. Now, I wasn't exactly clear. I studied architecture. What exactly is a slurry wall? You know, it's a dam. It's a huge dam. On the left side is the Hudson River. All the pressure of the Hudson River. Now, think about it. If this wall had collapsed, this dam, all the subways would have been inundated by waters. It would have been the apocalypse. That wall was very important to me, and it's hard to maintain it because a foundation is meant to be built upon. You know, structurally, you cannot have a living foundation which is just empty. You know, you can see it in Rome or in Athens, you know, old foundations standing. But a new foundation, which is still supporting the highest buildings in the world. I had the good fortune to work with the engineers of Port Authority who believed in my idea, and it's hard to do it, to expose the foundation, but I wanted people to see the foundation from the bedrock, and that's really in the 9/11 Museum, one of the most important features of orientation of what is below the ground. And by the way, when Pope Francis came to New York recently to give an ecumenical address about peace, to all religions, representatives of all religions were there. He chose, interestingly, you know, he could have chosen St. Patrick's Cathedral or Times Square or some other place in New York City, but he chose to give his address at the slurry wall. It was a statement about peace. It was a statement about memory. It was a statement about rebirth. It was a statement of optimism, but it was a statement also of history. And of course, the footprints of the site, the public space, with now the Performing Arts Center, Visitor Center going on. Very important that you understand that from the 16 acres, the space has only 16 acres, but half of it, 8 acres, I preserved for public good. That's very hard when you have 10 million square feet of office space you're required to do, 5 million square feet of cultural space, 5 million square more of infrastructure. You have millions of square feet of development. Very hard to preserve a mega space, the largest piazza in New York, and I thought that's important. And by the way, the water was also part of my master plan, because I thought that you need nature, but you also need the acoustics of a waterfall to make your experience of reading the names on the edges of these footprints meaningful. And indeed, in Michael Arad's memorial, that waterfall is really there. And I was very criticized by the tabloids. You know, Libeskind wants to bring, you know, Niagara Falls to New York, but it was a good idea to bring the waterfalls. And you can see that it's a public space. It's very popular. There are more than 25 million visitors annually to this space, and yet it's still a building site. It's not completed. By the way, one more of things that you should know is that my aim in rebuilding this project was not just creating buildings and the master plan, but affirmation of life after death, after tragedy, after attack of terrorism. Affirmation of life has happened because more than 200,000 people have moved to Lower Manhattan since I started working. 200,000 people have moved to Lower Manhattan. Families, there's more schools, you know, the downtown has moved to Lower Manhattan. So it's no longer the old Lower Manhattan, you know, of the old Dutch, the English, Wall Street at night, empty. It's a lively, really new center of New York with an open space where you can breathe, where you can see a new perspective of New York. And by the way, I introduced a secondary space, public space, which no one asked me, New York never has enough space. I call it the wedge of light. You see 8:46 a.m. when the first tower struck, is a line of light which defines an edge of a building. 10:28, when the second tower collapsed, is the center of the Peth Terminal, very dramatic skyline. So it's a memorial in light, and it's a memorial for the public. And even on a dark day, when there is no sunlight, you will feel the shift of the grid in New York. And there is the Peth Terminal connecting things, as I showed you, underground, a very, very important building on the side. And here you have, you know, the building standing within the grid, but also within that torch of liberty, which really is in the center of the site with the footprints and the memorial. And there is the picture of the wedge of light. There is the early drawing of the buildings, of the open space. And as you will see it, you know, pretty soon, with all the towers built, you know, seen from long perspectives. And I have to tell you, you know, I was an immigrant to New York. You know,